Hey everyone, this is Ethan from Gravity Profits. Six Flags recently just announced the new for Six Flags Over Texas dive coaster. We've known about this ride for a while at this point, at least that they were building a giga dive coaster, but now we have an official name, which is Tormenta Rampaging Run, and we also have a general idea of what it's going to look like and the layout. This video is going to be my analysis of the ride layout, what I think about it, and why I'm not a huge fan of this coaster in general. So starting out with the stats are actually extremely impressive. The coaster is 309 feet tall, making it the tallest dive coaster ever by a lot. The drop is 285 feet tall, which of course also gives it the speed record of 87 miles per hour. It also has the tallest immelman in the world at 218 feet, the tallest vertical loop at 179 feet, and it also has a 95-degree drop, making it the tallest beyond vertical drop. So to start out with an analysis of the layout, you're going to start by going up the lift hill, and then you're going to go into a left-hand turn and then into the drop. Right off the bat, I think that this drop's going to be amazing. Currently, my favorite drop on a dive coaster is on Dr. Diabolical's Cliffhanger, which is only around 150 feet tall. Just because it's beyond vertical at 95 degrees, I think it just makes it that much better. I actually enjoy it a lot more than something like Valraven that's a lot taller. Since this drop is 95 degrees and also nearly double what Dr. Diabolical is, I think that it's just going to be insane. I think in a case like this, having a really big drop with a holding brake almost kind of makes it better because along with it just being cool while you sit over the edge, I think that'll also kind of help because you're going to go slower, so it'll just feel like you're falling faster. You are still going to get some pretty solid airtime, and I think it's just going to be a really fun experience that's nothing like any other coaster out there. Right after the drop, you go straight into the 218-foot tall immelman. I'm not really sure how I feel about this element. I think that realistically you won't really notice a difference between this and Valraven other than the fact that you're going faster at the bottom. So it is cool that it's such a tall inversion, which I'm pretty sure would be the tallest in the world if it weren't for a new ride opening at Six Flags Qiddiya. But I'm not really sure it really means a whole lot other than just something cool to put on paper, because I really don't think that you could notice the extra height from this inversion. It's definitely cool that it has it, but I think it's just a bit more of a gimmick. Immediately following the world's tallest immelman, you have the world's tallest vertical loop. When I was talking to Kate about this at first, he was saying that even though it is kind of a gimmick, it is just going to be cool riding a loop that big with all the hang time at the top. I think I would have to disagree though. I think that's something like Full Throttle or like Hypercoaster, which has really tall vertical loops. I think that with those, what makes it so fun is both the hang time but also how open it is having lap bars. Even though it's cool that this is such a tall inversion, I feel like the vest restraints might just ruin it. I know that with Six Flags vest restraints, they have to lock it down, so stuff like X-Flight or Dr. Diabolical just becomes super uncomfortable towards the end. I'm not sure if they're going to go towards the Cedar Fair or the Six Flags way of doing it with the merge, but if that is the case, I think that would completely ruin it. So I feel like any sense of hang time is going to be a lot less noticeable and enjoyable on this. So yeah, overall I just think it's a little disappointing that the tallest vertical loops on a coaster are B&M vest restraints of all things, as opposed to something like a mock lap bar that's just super open and free. Next, you have this element that I think is an immelman, but I wouldn't be surprised if it has some different name by some technicality. I do find it kind of interesting that between the immelman and the vertical loop, it loses almost 40 feet of height. I guess maybe that just comes with having such wide trains that probably suffer a lot from air resistance, as well as just it being really fast where air resistance is just more noticeable. But I do find this element kind of interesting because it looks a lot tighter than I feel like it should be. When I saw the height of the mid-course relative to the overall structure, I thought it seemed strange how short it is, but looking at this element, I kind of wonder if maybe the train genuinely does lose a lot of speed by this point. It's hard to say, maybe this element is just going to be extremely forceful, but I think that it is possible that the train's not going as fast as I'm expecting at this point, just based on this. Next, you of course have the mid-course brake run. I do find it kind of interesting how this entire section of ride is pretty compact. You pretty much have the station, the turnaround into the lift hill, the immelman, the loop, and the mid-course all in this thin section of track. It kind of makes me wonder how much space they had to work with, and it is pretty impressive seeing all this track just in that area and how they made it work. And don't worry, I'm sure that just like every other dive coaster, the mid-course is going to completely stop the train before the second drop. I would have to guess that the mid-course is probably a little under 150 feet tall, so the scale at this point is maybe about the same as just any other tall dive coaster like Valraven or SheiKra. I do find the ending to be a little more interesting than the first half. The first half is definitely carried by the stats, but I feel like the ending actually looks kind of interesting. So right after the second drop, you go right into another immelman. After that, there's this interesting like cutback element. I'm not really sure how it's going to be. It definitely seems interesting having something like that in a dive coaster, since that's not really an element that I imagine being on a dive coaster, nor that I imagine B&M doing. So it's definitely kind of cool to see. Maybe it'll end up being a pretty good element, who knows. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the layout. After that, you just go into a right-hand turn into a really long brake run, just like all the other dive coasters. Overall, I'm not really a big fan of this layout. I think that this is definitely a case of just a gimmicky ride that's just carried by stats that's not really going to be that popular in the long run. B&M has had a track record recently of making rides that aren't super smooth, so I'm a little worried about what it would be like being in the back row on a wing seat while you're going almost 90 miles per hour. I can't imagine that's going to be a super enjoyable experience. In general, dive coasters tend to be crowd pleasers that the GP love just because of the big drop, but I almost wonder if it could get so bad that it's at the point that the GP just doesn't like it because it's straight out rough. I do hope B&M can figure out some of those issues because I am really excited to see what a B&M dive giga coaster would be like. Another thing to point out, this has the record for being the longest dive coaster in the world, but just looking at the layout, it really doesn't look like it. Even though it has over 4,000 feet of track, a lot of the layout is just carried by how long the brake run and lift hill is, as well as just the ride being drawn out because it's so fast. If you actually take it for what it is, you pretty much just have 5 inversions and a couple of turns to get it into the right area. So I feel like it's not going to feel as complete as something like a smaller dive coaster like Wrath or Dr. Diabolical. I feel like Cedar Fair also shows us time and time again that record-breaking coasters aren't really that crazy. If it's truly a good ride and a really insane record like King de Ka, then people will continue to ride it even if the ride itself isn't that great. But I feel like just looking at Cedar Point's editions like Gatekeeper and Valraven, you just don't find them having a very big attendance after some time. Now, I'm not sure if that would be a big issue for this ride just because Over Texas just doesn't have as strong as a lineup. But it is just a little disappointing to see because I feel like they could have made something that's equally as good or even better in the long run if they just went for a quality ride instead of a bunch of records. I can't imagine this ride's too cheap for them to make either, with it being over 4,000 feet long, having the expensive dive coaster, bigger track, and also just being a giga coaster. So I imagine they're paying a lot for this and they could have built something a lot better with that. Again, I feel like the GP will probably like it unless it just ends up being insanely rough. But I think that Over Texas is missing a standout top one. New Texas Giant just isn't that great by today's standards, and I feel like a lot of the coasters there are kind of in like the good but not anything special range in my opinion. I will say, I think that since Cliffhanger is only 6 hours away, I feel like they did have to kind of go big if they made a dive coaster. I feel like if it was around the 200 feet range, a lot of people would just think it's just a copy of that ride and they might not really care for it. So I do feel like they kind of had to go really big for a dive coaster. I do also kind of wonder though if just another B&M could have been a better fit. Like for example, if they went for a wing coaster, kind of like Thunderbird, that just aimed at being a fun quality ride that also still has a high capacity. But yeah, a lot of this still is just speculation. I am still really excited to hopefully ride this someday. Even though I don't see it being better than other smaller dive coasters, because I feel like 150 to maybe like 200 feet is kind of the sweet spot when it comes to these rides. I am still really excited to try to ride it someday. I imagine the drop is going to be insane with it being beyond vertical and just like the tallest drop we've seen that's this steep. I'm just not completely sure about how good of an addition this is to the park. I feel like the park could have used some other rides, and I feel like there have to have been other options that would probably be cheaper. I can't imagine a 2025 B&M Giga being that cheap to make. But yeah, that's going to be about it for my thoughts and analysis of the introduction for Tormenta Rampaging Run coming to Six Flags Over Texas. Thanks for watching this video. This has been Ethan from Gravity Profits. Bye.